Hey guys, it's Mishel, Deception Bytes, coming to you with Q's greatest hits. No, not really. I'm just picking up from where I left off with the Q posts. I didn't post yesterday. These drops are getting very, very intense and very large, and it takes a long time to research. So I may not have all the answers, but I have some, and I'm going to bring them to you. And I do want to apologize for the last video I made in which I stated that PG stood for parental guidance, because it most certainly does not. And you guys are the ones that set me straight, and I thank you for that. It stands for Pizzagate, of course. As soon as I read that, I went, oh my gosh, like, why didn't I think of that? But that's why we all need one another. So let's get on with today, because we've got a lot of information and a lot of deep information to process. And I may have to split this into two videos, but I'm sure that you guys won't mind if I have to do that. So this is the first one, and it's from April 8th. And Q says, night 4, increase in chatter. Authorize B19-2. Sparrow, red. Prevent at all costs. Good. Castle online. Q. Now, I had wondered about what castle was, and I think in this case, people are right when they say he's referring to a chess move. So whoever is going to be doing this, they're online now. This person that's gonna, it's like a chess game, except it's a war, really. And night 4, I think that he's saying that there's 4. These are obviously aircraft that maybe shouldn't be there, or that are posing some threat. And Q is saying increase in chatter. And so he's then saying, and obviously this person has more authority than just, whatever, because he's authorizing, as far as I can see here, he's either saying that these two B-19s have been authorized, or he's authorizing it. And he's saying Sparrow, red. I'm not exactly sure what that stands for. I know that there's a movie, Red Sparrow, about a spy, but I'm not sure in this regard what he is referring to, but this threat is obviously in the sky. And he is saying prevent at all costs. Good. Now, and I don't really think that, I think that this is put on here partly to communicate to whoever, but also I think that it's for our benefit, so that we can see that there are threats out there, and this is going on, and it is a war, because they could communicate via back channel ways without him having to put this on here. So I think really it's for our benefit to kind of see what's going on and to feel like we're a part of it. And then referring to this post, he says prevent, period. Authorize first strike. That's what I believe that means, because that makes sense in this situation. Then I think he is giving this authorization to this castle. Castle, green, like go. And then I think this code is some sort of an authorization code that authorizes them to strike. And then he says contact window okay. And contact window would be the window of time until it makes contact with the target. That's what I think. It makes sense to me. And he signs it Q, of course. But he's authorizing a strike right now. This is a threat, and the strike is being authorized. Now, and this, yes, is in reference to the one that he had just posted. And the next post, and it is referring to this, he says tracking good, relay back channel, SWHEP1. Now, he's saying relay what happened, tracking good. Relay this what happened through the back channel. So S, whoever that is, then to the White House, then to E, then to P1. Now, I don't know what this is. I would assume WH is White House. And whoever he's talking to here has to relay what just happened through the channel, the back channel. And then he says, fly high. Q. All right. Now, we're getting into some interesting things here. And we're getting into the war in Syria. And I really have had a new appreciation and a new understanding about what's happening, because at first I was very confused. And I thought, wait a minute, Trump said that we're pulling out of Syria. And then all of a sudden I realized that, okay, I've been believing this whole narrative about Syria all along, which isn't true. And so I really started digging and investigating, because I wanted to understand for my own purpose, not just to bring it to you guys, but I really wanted to understand this because it's critical. It really is critical. And I didn't understand how critical it really was, that Syria is really the linchpin. And what's going on, what the globalists are trying to do depends on Syria and depends on that war, continuing. And so it's the globalists that are trying to destabilize the area. And I'm going to walk us through this, because really this is why, I didn't post yesterday, because by the time I finished with all this stuff, I was like, oh my gosh, it was just too much to process, and I needed some time to process it. So, this post is where it starts with Syria. He says, they are trying to start a war. They are trying to start a war. Well, who's they? It's the deep state, the cabal, the globalists. They are trying to start a war. Well, there already is a war in Syria. They want that to keep going, but they are wanting to start World War III over Syria. And you know what? There's a good possibility, because I did not understand how critical this was. I know I keep saying that, but it's just, I don't know. Let me just go ahead and walk us through. And then he says, deflection, public interest shift, pullout announcement, chemical attack, coincidence. These people are sick. Q. So what he's saying, and there has been a public interest shift in Donald Trump's favor. There definitely has, because now his approval rating is up over 50%, and that's phenomenal. People certainly recognize that Trump is doing things. I mean, they're starting to recognize that, oh gosh, our economy's doing great. There's jobs here. People are doing good. These businesses and everything are coming back to the States. All this stuff is going on, and it has caused a public interest shift. And plus all the work that we've been doing, all of us, Twitter pages and everything else, to try to educate the public at large, that is having an effect as well. So Trump gives this pullout announcement, and it's interesting because right after that, there's the chemical attack. And that was, okay, certainly, they can't pull out if there's that much instability. So it was meant to keep them there, because the globalists have interest in keeping that war going. Now, he says, coincidence? These people are sick. Oh, yeah, these people are definitely sick. And the chemical attack did not come from the Russians or the Chinese. I mean, I think that that's going to come out. And even if they do come out and say that, I won't believe it. I will not believe it, because it doesn't make sense. It came from the rebel forces within Syria. It did not come from Assad, who they're fighting against. It didn't. It came from them. Now, I am going to let me read this, and then I'm going to go out to, there's a little 5-minute video that is so good on YouTube, and I'm going to play it for you because it explains the war, it explains it in a nutshell. And it's going to be important for us to understand, or what's coming ahead isn't going to make sense. If you don't really understand what's happening in Syria, what's coming up isn't going to make sense to you. So I'm going to read this, and then I'm going to take us out there. Now, this YouTube video is very, very biased. So I'll explain when we get there. Let me see here. Now, this is a complicated war. This is a messy, cruel war where neither side has much regard for civilian casualties. The war is not black and white. You might think it's the brave rebels versus the evil dictatorial regime, and that's part of the story, but it's not all of it, not by a long shot. Even as the civil, and I took this quote out of an article, even as the civil war rages, the Assad family remains popular with many middle-class Syrians, especially urbanized Sunni Muslims, says Dr. Robert Shanahan, and he is a doctor that is right in that region. They still prefer him to the opposition. So the Syrians, for the most part, are for Assad. Yeah, it was a dictatorship, but it was a heck of a lot better than the rebels, what the rebels are offering. And if you want to understand too, listen to Syrian Girl. She's been on InfoWars many times, and she actually lived there. She's now living in Australia, I believe, but she has a really good grip on it because she is Syrian. Her family is still there, and she knows what's going on. So that's a good person to listen to if you want unbiased opinion on who they're really backing, the Syrians. Okay, now, the United Nations estimates that more than 1.5 million refugees have now fled Syria. And see, this was part of the design, because it's the refugees from Syria that are flooding into the rest of Europe and destabilizing Europe, which makes it, very easy for the globalists to walk in afterwards. But anyway, Father David Smith visited several camps across the border in Lebanon, a country whose population of 4.3 million is bulging with the influx of a total of nearly 2 million Palestinian and Syrian refugees. So it's more than just, this is where all the problems are stemming from, is Syria. And let's go out and to this, and because I think it's gonna help for those of you that
the Syrian conflict in 5 minutes. After enduring decades of authoritarian governments, the people of several Middle Eastern countries raised their voices in protest and ousted their leaders in what has been called the Arab Spring. In Egypt and Tunisia, the uprisings were quick and decisive. In Libya, the protests led to a short civil war that ended with the death of Muammar Gaddafi. Syria is another story. This is Bashar al-Assad, president of Syria. His father, Hafez, ruled for 30 years, during which he modernized the country, but at the cost of a brutal repression. Bashar came into power after his father's death in 2000, and at first he signaled he would be a different kind of leader, but the honeymoon with his people didn't last. At the first sign of dissent, Assad tightened the restrictions to free speech, isolated the economy, and left very clear that democratic rule wasn't in his plans. 12 years of repression had to pass before thousands of people, following the example of Egyptians and Tunisians, took to the streets to demand reforms. At first, Assad's stance was conciliatory, but the repression continued, which in turn multiplied protests around the country. The army answered by opening fire against the demonstrators. Hundreds died, and thousands more were arrested. Any chance of a peaceful resolution died with the demonstrators. Small groups of armed rebels started to appear almost immediately.
Okay, when it talks about the small groups of armed rebels, some of these were, organically grown, but most were, like 99%, were funded and equipped by the U.S. Okay, so the U.S. stepped in after the death of the protesters. But the thing is, the people have openly said, the Syrians have openly said, no, we would rather have Assad than have the rebels, because they're extremists. And so anyway, that's where this civil war started, is when these factions came in after the protesters were shot by the government opened fire on the protesters, and these rebel forces stepped in. But it was initiated by the U.S., and the U.S. Funded them and armed them, and we're going to see how later.
Since then, government and rebels are mired in a war that claimed the lives of more than 60,000 Syrians in the first 18 months of conflict. After World War I, the French and the British established the borders of the Middle Eastern countries, grouping many religions and ethnic groups in the same territories. One of them, the Muslim sect of the Alawites, has been in command of Syria since the 70s, despite representing only 12% of the population. Under the ideology of keeping the country out of the hands of extremists, the Assads heavily favored their sect and crushed those who challenged them.
And I think that that's what he was trying to do, is to keep the country out of the hands of the extremists, because he and his father had really modernized this country. And really, I believe that he was raised in Britain. So, I mean, he's not an extremist. And I think, honestly, that's what he was trying to do. I don't personally think that he was trying to, anyway, let's go on.
Since the outset of the war, it was clear that it would last a long time, mainly because the different rebel groups didn't have numbers, weapons, or a unifying ideology. The only thing they have in common is a deep hate for Assad. As the weeks and months passed, the rebels have increased in numbers and weapons, but not enough to topple Assad, who is now receiving help from Iran. Also, many of the rebel groups have abused, killed, and displaced civilians in the name of the revolution, leaving many Syrians wondering if the cure is worse than the disease. Mainly because Russia and China have blocked any kind of international effort against Assad.
See, Russia and China have blocked any efforts against Assad. However, we shouldn't be in there anyway. Like, it's just see, Iran is supporting Assad, and Russia and China back Assad, but our government wants to go in and attack Assad, and which would put the rebels in control, which are extremists, because it says there's all these different factions and they didn't have a cohesive ideology. Well, and then the U.S. comes along and gives them a cohesive ideology through Al-Qaeda, and they created it. They're creating and perpetuating the problem. And you can see these rebels, they're not wanting freedom. They're rounding up citizens and killing them, innocent civilians. So here we go.
Russia and China have interests in Syria, and their leaders believe the Arab Spring hasn't brought security or stability to the region. The U.S. hasn't intervened openly because it hasn't found a group who's aligned with its ideology and is...
Did you see this, picture of him picking up, it says Al-Qaeda, and he throws it away? Yeah, well, that didn't happen. They didn't discard that idea.
Wary that an intervention could give strength to radical groups. The experts believe that Assad will fall eventually. The question is how long it will take. Although the main rebel groups have joined an alliance, it could crumble once Assad is ousted. The struggle for power could lead to a new civil war, and even to a fragmentation of the country. The conflict could also extend to countries such as Turkey, Lebanon, and Iraq, threatening the fragile stability of the Middle East. No matter the outcome, whoever assumes power in Syria will inherit a country in ruins, with an economy in shambles, a deeply divided population, and the challenge to fulfill the promises of the Arab Spring.
Okay, so let's go back here. It just gives a little bit of oversight to it, because what we're hearing, obviously we don't get the news. We don't really get the news. We have no actual news sources, so we have to go to alternate news sites and alternate means of finding out information. So if you've been listening to the mainstream media, which you probably haven't, because I think probably 99.9% of you are red-pilled, but if you have been listening, then you're not getting the right story. And we can't just go in there and bomb them and take out Assad, because then you're going to have these rebels, these extremists in charge, and it's going to be even worse than it is now. So you can see that officially the U.S. has not, intervened officially, but unofficially they've intervened a whole lot. And you know who's right at the center of it? McStain, the name we don't say, him of whom we do not speak. Yes. Okay, so that's where we're headed here. Now, this Anon writes, Putin is Russia's president. His job is to look after the Russian people. Correct. Put yourself in his shoes. He wants to win. Why not take advantage of his enemies? Trump comes along. Russia, Putin become our ally. Xi becomes our ally. Xi and Putin are also under attack by the deep state, which is rooted globally. So, yeah, this person's got it right. And Q responds to this, and he acknowledges it, but then he says, POTUS never telegraphs his moves. Think logically. Why did POTUS announce his intention to pull out of Syria? Moves and counter moves. These people are stupid and sick. Q. So POTUS announced, because I was confused about that. I thought, why are we pulling out of Syria? Shouldn't we be there? I mean, officially, we've been there, I guess, to keep the peace or whatever, but, I don't really know. I know there are bases there in Syria, U.S. bases, but anyway, he announced that he's pulling out because it forced their hand. Now, is he responsible for the gas attack? No, the rebels did that. But I do think that that's why we shouldn't be in Syria anyway. We should never have been in Syria. So anyway, let's keep going here. And, some of you may disagree with me, and that's fine. We all have our own opinions because we're all individual people. And my thing has always been, if two people think exactly alike, then one of them isn't necessary. Well, if you have additional information or you want to add information, make sure to put it in the comments below, because our goal collectively here is to educate ourselves, right? So, yeah. Let's go on. Now, disregard this for a minute. I actually put that in there. And that. Okay, so Q posts this next, and we're going to go back to the war in later posts, but POTUS and JFK Jr. And then he writes, relationship. Well, turns out they did have a relationship. They were friends, and I grabbed a couple pictures to show them together. There they are. I don't know where they are. Maybe a game or something. I don't know. Anyway, and there they are. They were friends. And let's go to this link. This is very interesting. JFK Jr. predicted Trump's run for president 20 years ago. Isn't that interesting? I found that quite fascinating. John F. Kennedy Jr. 20 years ago predicted the rise of Donald Trump as a presidential candidate. Michael Berman, one-time partner of Kennedy on the launch of George, the political pop culture magazine, recalled the prescient comments last week in remarks to note a six-figure donation he and his wife, interior designer Victoria Hagan, recently made to Elon University School of Communications. In 1996, Berman said Kennedy flew a select group of advertisers to Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate after an industry conference in Florida. Trump was in attendance at the smaller gathering. As frequently happened to Kennedy at his events, talks soon turned to whether he could envision himself running for president. Trying to deflect the presidential chatter, Kennedy noted that the Trump estate was far more glamorous than a Kennedy family compound a few miles away. "I think you should be asking those questions of Donald," Kennedy said, according to Berman. He'd clearly have the most extravagant White House. He'd clearly have the most extravagant winter White House, the then 35-year-old editor-in-chief said Berman of the donation he and his wife made to Elon's journalism program. This year, when the premise of politics as pop culture seems as relevant as ever, it's time to encourage a new generation of aspiring journalists to challenge the status quo. So, I don't know if there's... Anyway, it shows that they're friends, and it shows that, he was joking about Trump running for president 20 years ago. So, let's go back. So they did have a relationship. Now, plane crash, 1999. We all know about that. He and his wife were flying. He was a pilot, and he had his own airplane, and it crashed into the ocean. And he and his wife were killed. So the interesting thing is that he was about to announce he was running for New York Senate against Hillary. Yeah. And he would have won. We know that. I mean, just by his name alone, he would have won. Everybody loved him. Everybody loved his father. And he would have won. There's no question he would have won. And he would have one day been president. There's just, I really do believe that. But Hillary wanted that seat. She needed that seat because she wanted to become president. She needed a Senate seat. And so that's... I honestly believe that there's too many things that don't make sense about his crash. And we're going to see that in a minute. But anyway, sorry. So she ran for the Senate, 2000, and Q says, the start. Enjoy the show. So I think he's saying that's when, it all started. I think that's what he's saying anyway. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what he's saying, the start, but I'm thinking that this was, a big major event. This was the start of Hillary getting into politics and, her climb up the ladder. Now, down here, I have another link. Interesting website regarding Kennedy deaths. Let's take a look at that. And we're not going to look at all of them because there isn't time. But let me scroll down here to... okay, hang on. I think it was down here. Just bear with me for a moment. Okay. Having established, okay, this person goes into great detail that we can't trust mainstream media, and we already know that, so we're ahead of the game. Having established that the government and the media have a prior and quite deplorable record of deliberate lies to the public, let us look at how the official story of the crash of John F. K. Jr.'s plane evolved and why it is suspect. As first reported by United Press International, John F. Kennedy Jr. on approach to Martha's Vineyard in 8-mile visibility, the news lied about that, was in radio contact with the ground, calmly informing them of his intentions to drop off a passenger before proceeding to Hyannis Airport. Then, according to ABC News, JFK Jr.'s plane went into a steep dive and crashed. Now, he had also his wife's sister on board, and so that was probably who he was going to drop off. And he just calmly radioed. There was 8-mile visibility, and he just calmly radioed his plans that he was going to drop off a passenger before proceeding to Hyannis Airport. However, even before the wreckage was found, the story being put out by the media began to change. Gone was the previously reported radio conversation a calm JF Jr. had with ground personnel just before the plane fell out of the sky, replaced by a declaration from the NTSB that JFK Jr. had not used his radio at all as he approached Martha's Vineyard. Gone also was the originally reported 8-mile visibility, while the media began to hammer home the claim that Martha's Vineyard had been totally blanketed with a haze so heavy that pilots in the air would have been blind. That was a complete lie. It was complete... a completely clear evening, no bad weather, and there was 8-mile visibility. So no sooner were the various stories put out than they quickly fell apart. But they quickly fell apart. Now, hang on. Propaganda. JFK Jr. was lost. Fact. When JFK Jr. radioed controllers on the Cape, as reported to Boston TV News, to announce his approach to Martha's Vineyard, radar showed him to be just where he stated he was, and at the correct altitude for the approach. Propaganda. JFK Jr. was in over his head. Fact. JFK Jr.'s conversational tone on the radio revealed that he was calm. He was not disoriented. He didn't ask for directions. He didn't indicate he had any problem at all. He clearly was confident he was going to find the airport and land. Propaganda. JFK Jr. stalled the plane. Fact. The radar track shows that he was well above stall speed. Propaganda. JFK Jr. went into a steep turn and lost his horizon. Fact. There is no reason for JFK Jr. to have been in any turn at all at that point on the flight path leading into the airport. He was already lined up with the main runway at Martha's Vineyard Airport. Just one second. Propaganda. He lost his instruments, and that's why he could not handle the dark and hazy conditions. Fact. The fact that the radar was getting good data from his encoding altimeter proves his instruments were operating. Propaganda. He would have lost his artificial horizon if the vacuum pump failed in his aircraft. Fact. MSNBC is the only media outlet to have tried to hype this one using a self-proclaimed aviation expert. His claim is also false, as there is a backup vacuum system in the pilot. It's a typo. In the pilot assembly of that aircraft. Propaganda. He was a reckless pilot. Fact. That claim planted elsewhere in the media, also attributed to an unnamed source. One reporter, Cindy Adams at the New York Post, later had cause to suspect she had been lied to. So did Andrew Goldman at the New York Observer. Interviews with individuals directly familiar with JFK Jr.'s flying ability shown on Inside Edition confirmed that he was a highly skilled and careful pilot. Propaganda. His wife was afraid to fly with them. Again, a story attributed to unnamed sources, and again debunked on the interview shown on Inside Edition. JFK Jr.'s wife had no problem flying with JFK Jr. and flew with him often. Propaganda. He only had 40 hours experience. Fact. He had 40 hours in that one aircraft. His total experience was about 300 hours, more than enough to qualify him for a commercial pilot's license. According to FAA statistics, 300 hours made him a more careful and safer pilot than one with 1,000 hours who is more complacent. Makes sense. Propaganda. The weather was very hazy. Fact, the FAA issued VFR weather conditions that night, and the weather report mentioned in the UPI story called for 8-mile visibility. One witness on shore reported that there was very little haze and that standing on the shore, he could see airplanes out over the ocean on approach to the island, proof that airplanes on the approach could see the shore. The claim is backed up not only by the weather report of 8-mile visibility, but by a weather radar image taken at about the time of the crash. The radar image is showing haze and fog along New York and Long Island. If this radar image were of clouds, the FAA would not have declared FVR, I'm not sure what that stands for, whatever, flying conditions that night, but none at all at Martha's Vineyard. On the morning after the crash, CNN reported that weather could be ruled out as a factor in the crash. Propaganda. Martha's Vineyard is very dark and won't show through the haze. That may have been true only a few months ago, however, as evidenced to a letter to the editor of the Martha's Vineyard Times just days after the JFK Jr. crash. New lights installed on the island, lights that point up to the sky, are so bright that they're drawing complaints from island residents. That the Kennedy family has been target of political assassination is part of the American political landscape. It's a given. That cover-up surrounds the deaths of Kennedy is also a given. That our government lies to us with the media's help is a given. There is good cause to assume we are being lied to yet again. So, yeah, it was murder. And I think probably most of us already knew that. But there we go. Now, and Q is telling us that it had to do with Hillary Rodham Clinton. And that's been suspect for a very long time. And people will poo-poo that, but it makes sense to me. I mean, we know she's not averse to offing somebody, right? Okay. And he refers to this post again, the one that we just read, and Q is referring to his own post above, and he says signal intercept. Oh, okay, I finally got this. You know what? It's so funny because I spent a long time in this. I was like, I don't get it. I don't get it. Don't get it. Now I get it. Okay. Q is telling us that what happened to his plane was a signal intercept. Because he's referring to this. He's referring to this. So this whole thing is about the plane crash, and he's saying, pointing to that, and he's saying signal intercept. Old to new, as the world turns, Q. Now, this goes out to, see, I didn't get this because this went out to something, well, I'll show you. I love it when things click in. Okay. Now, this is from CIA.gov, and Q pointed us to it, and it's Chief Collection Staff Executive Officer SI Earth Satellite Program. And this is in January 1956. So it's an agency decision has been reached establishing OSI as the focal point on the Earth Satellite Program. The AD has directed that staff supervision of the program will be the responsibility of the DAD-C, with substantive responsibility assigned to guided missiles. According action on the attached letter to Mr. Dulles is assigned, and of course that was the head of the CIA back then, is assigned to collection staff. It is suggested that Mr. Furness, or could be Furness, I think, be contacted immediately and arrangements made for office representatives to attend tomorrow's meeting. So Q is leading us to this about the Earth Satellite Program. This was in 1956. And back here, hang on, let's go back. And back here, he's saying signal intercept. So he's saying that's what happened, and that this technology has been there since 1956. So some sort of intercept happened, and they do say that his plane just dropped right out of the sky. Now, that's crazy. So, especially on a clear night, on a flight path that he's very familiar with. That doesn't make sense. He's an experienced pilot, so it doesn't make sense. Okay, so let's go on. We've already solved the fact that JFK was killed, JFK Jr. Okay, now this Anon posts this. POTUS hunkering down today? And Q responds and says, Situation Room, Q. So he's saying that the president is in the Situation Room. Now, okay, here's the next post by Q. After all these years, no mainstream media positive media blast, and that's in conjunction with the denuclearization plans of North Korea, or their plans to denuclearize. And he says, after all these years, no mainstream media positive media blast? Now, wouldn't you think if they've been trying to do this for years and years and years and years, that the media would be all over this and like all over Trump like a cheap suit? Seriously. I mean, like, I don't, that right there tells me that something's way, way, way off. I mean, we already know, but it's things like this that just prove it in my mind, because you're right. Like, the media should be eating this up. And then Q says, think. Now Syria? And so now the uprising, or the problem with the chemical weapons in Syria, Iran, Russia flex through missile technology. We start asking, coincidence? Long ago, for a specific reason. Those awake can finally see for themselves. Conspiracy? Have faith, trust the plan. Q. Now, I'll just go out to show you this. And I don't think he meant for us to read it, because you have to actually have a subscription to read it. But it talks about North Korea ready to discuss denuclearization. U.S. Officials say, and please don't get upset with me by the way I say nuclear. I'm trying. Okay, North Korea has told the U.S. that Kim Jong-un is prepared to discuss denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, clearing the way for a summit meeting between the North Korean leader and President Donald Trump, U.S. officials said. Big news. Should be everywhere. Should be everywhere we turn. That's all we should be hearing about. But nope, media silent. And all this stuff it's all distraction. It's all distraction. So, now, I think I'm going to break here and do this in another part, because there's quite a bit to it, and I don't want this to turn into like a monster post. So I'm going to stop here, upload this, and I will record the next one and upload that directly after. So there we go. Thank you so much for listening, and make sure that if you want to be subscribed, that you are subscribed, because they keep dropping people from the channel. And click the bell, and that way you'll get notified whenever there's a new upload. And thank you so much, guys. You guys are so awesome. I feel very, very fortunate and blessed to have the listeners that I do. So I will talk to you guys later.